let's begin that panel conversation. We've already met Ivy Kuo from PwC. We've met Chris Usher from BPP, but we have a third guest as well, Tarik Moussa. Hello there, Tarik.
Hi, Clive.
Hello there. Now, for those of us who haven't met you, give us a taste of who you are, where you work, what you do.
Sure, thanks, Clive. Like Ivy, I'm from PwC, but based out of London in our UK office. I work in our sustainability and climate change consulting team, focusing on what I like to call innovation and sustainability. So how do you use technology, innovation, digital for sustainability, whether that's environmental sustainability, things like climate change, e-waste, and so on, or for social causes of the kinds Chris was talking about earlier on. So just transition, how do we think about the future of work? How do we think about equality and so on?
Excellent. Well, look, thanks so much for joining us, Tarik, from London there. That's very much appreciated. I've got a few things that I'm keen to put to the three of you here, but very much, of course, open to questions that everyone else has. So whether it was something that Chris said, something that Ivy said, your own question that you'd love to get answered by one of our three experts here, do pitch in with it in the chat, and I'll do my best to bring it to our guests. The first thing I think I wanted to ask you about, it relates a little to something that Ivy mentioned earlier on Ivy's sort of 4 areas of concern. One of them was board comfort, the idea of the fact that the senior decision makers within your business need to be comfortable, need to commit to this. I suppose my question is, are we confident now that the key board decision makers in the organisations we're talking about are all committed to this? Or is there still a kind of wavering hesitancy in some quarters about ESG? Ivy, what are your thoughts?
I think most of the boards are, I hope they're aware of ESG and they know what ESG is. Most of the C-level people that we've spoken to are aware of this sort of hot topic, hot trend. It's on the news every day, right? Whether it's the climate change or decarbonization, etc. So it's hard to ignore it. So I think most people are aware of it. How the topic is relevant for them, I think varies from company to company. And so the more advanced ones, like I said, top-down commitment, this is something I need to be involved in from the C-level down or the board level down, right? And so those, you would see a lot of conversation happen between, not just the CEO, but the CIO, CTO, CMO, COO. I mean, I know one of my clients, every conversation, every report, conversation meeting we have, all the 4 C-levels are present because they all think it's such an important topic. And that's, funny enough, they believe it's the one thing that everyone is so aligned, right? Mm-hmm. So you have this type of company, and then you have the type of company where I think they know it's important, but it's hard to get everyone to buy in. So they're trying different approaches. They start with, so this is when I say, you have a specific topic, which maybe it's compliance driven. Let's start with that, right? And see how it goes and start sort of, hopefully, that translates into other people's mindset, and then let's move slowly. Mm-hmm. So at the top level, you have that. But the reality is, if anybody's company's board level isn't aware of ESG, I think they're in trouble.
No, I think that's a reasonable conclusion. Absolutely. Chris, what are your thoughts? Do you think there's a consistent buy-in from board level, or is it variable?
Very variable. I think we're at a very early stage journey, if I'm honest. It reminds me a lot of compliance 20, 25 years ago. People have sort of heard of it. They sort of know, they think they know what they need to do, but actually ESG are 3 letters that they need to get their head around. And a lot of them look at it as a cost center. And I think, a lot of them just look at it as something else that we've got to do. You're quite right, Ivy. This is something everybody can and should get behind. There should be no barriers to any of this. But I think it's about educating people to understand what it's about and what the risks are to them of not being sincerely bought in. But it's very early in the journey, I think.
Tarik, as an expert in sustainability, as a sustainability consultant, what's your view on this? Is ESG being consistently accepted as important, or is it, as Chris suggests there, just a cost center, an added extra?
Yeah, would really reiterate Chris and Ivy's views. I think it's really variable at the moment. You have some leaders who are all over this, and are looking at the value creation opportunity, not just ESG as a compliance issue, as a reporting issue, as a cost issue. How can they create new incremental revenue opportunities from this? How can they engage their employees, and so on? Governance is governance, and good governance is good governance. And you'd think that ESG as a driver of financial risk and opportunity should be handled by existing governance through existing measures. But what we found is, because it's such a new topic, because it's so complex, and because it's so rapidly evolving, if you think about where we were 12, 18 months ago, it's a completely different world now. We think that board members need specialist training. There's really good guidance out there. TCFD, for example, if you're focused on climate change, has some guidance on how to set up your governance so you can think about how the board engages on this and what meetings they need to have and what responsibilities they should have.
Are you suggesting some positive news there, Tarik? Are you suggesting that there's been a shift from this being a sort of fringe concern to something that truly is starting to permeate through every aspect of the business?
I think so, yeah. I think there's a couple of drivers of that. In the climate change arena, I'm guessing lots of people in the audience will have been aware of COP26, the climate conference late last year held in Glasgow, organised by the United Nations. So that is a real big step change for climate change, one of the key ESG issues. We saw governments commit to taking increased action. We saw, I think it's now over 2,000 companies have committed to the Science Based Targets Initiative to set net zero goals. But just more widely, everyone is now aware of ESG issues. As Ivy said, it's in the news every day. You can't ignore it.
That's good. The struggle is still there. There's still plenty of work to do, but at least it's consistently on the table. Let's have a look at this poll now. If you've had a chance to vote in this poll, I'm just going to end this poll and then share the results. And let's see if we can learn anything here from the feeling within the room. Hopefully you can all see the results there. We can look at those 4 questions, and maybe our panelists here can just help us digest this. So we asked, what are the key areas of focus for your ESG compliance and certification? Quite a consistent range of different answers there across the offerings. The 2 biggest one were investor relations and stakeholder interest. Supply chain issues was reasonably high as well. But essentially all those different topics got a consistent answer. I mean, Ivy mentioned earlier that there's a lot of different places to start with this. There's no one clear concern or focus. I just wondered if our guests here have got any thoughts on the broad spread of answers we've got here.
So this is a huge challenge, isn't it? Because it's such a huge arena and everybody's got their own immediate concerns. And that just grows because, when you start to dissect ESG, it's huge. I've spent a lot of my life teaching on the G Street, teaching about anti-money laundering, financial crime risk management. How can you truly live ESG as a bank if you've just been prosecuted for laundering drug money from drug cartels? So that in itself is a whole universe, and that's just the speck of that universe. So it's really difficult. And I think it's as I say, it's a journey. And we're early in that journey. And this is an opportunity, I think, for companies to map where they are, to get good quality training and education and advice from the likes of our learned guests online. But I always say, look, if you're looking to go to New York, don't get on a train to Edinburgh. Make sure you're on the right journey. You've got to start somewhere and make sure you're going in the right direction. And I think it's about getting that good quality advice. But it's difficult. You can see the range of responses demonstrate that, I think. I don't know whether Ivy and Tarik would agree with that.
Ivy, you mentioned earlier that there are many different places to start. Is this result what you'd expect from our poll, that people are focusing in quite a broad range of places?
Yes, we've actually seen all the different elements. That's served as the pool for why they start the journey. But I want to add, as you get on that journey, other issues start popping up, and then you become more aware of it, right? So, so you may start with the investor relations because your investor write you an email. We've actually had a client that's received an email from the investor and said, "Yeah, your ESG rating is not so great." And then all of a sudden, the investor relations like, "What's ESG rating?" This is back 2 years ago, right? And so And so this was then, once it has a lot to do with money, that it, went straight up to the boardroom, right? And then that became the biggest initiative, right?
Sure.
And then you have clients that are, we had automotive clients when they have, OEMs that basically say, I made a commitment, so you being my supplier, you need to start doing something, right? So that becomes a sort of supply chain issue, etc. So yeah, start anywhere, but you got to jump on the train and start going somewhere.
Tarik, does this reflect your findings, your understanding that sometimes people's focus, organizations' focus change as they move through the journey?
Absolutely. I guess anecdotally, if you go back 5 years, the majority of clients I was working with were focused on CSR, corporate social responsibility. It was heads of CSR, sometimes heads of sustainability. And what we've seen over the past few years is that it shifted massively, and it's now much more evenly spread amongst CFOs, chief technology officers, chief digital officers, heads of procurement. Because ESG is not just something that you do in the corner of your organization, but it does really need to be embedded in everything you do. And you can see from the list of issues that we've got on screen there, that it really is impacting all areas of the business.
The second question we asked was where your organization is at in addressing sustainability as a priority. Perhaps no surprises in this one. A lot of people saying, 57% of people saying the strategic roadmap has been established. There's some responses there about tracking and measurement being underway, but nobody said it's been completely implemented. And that's probably a realistic and reassuring statement, isn't it, of where we're at with this. We're all of us on that journey. The third question is an interesting one that I think we could have some views on here. The question was, who is responsible for training in the ESG space? Quite relevant, especially to Chris in this conversation. And it's not as clear cut as we thought. A lot of people have answered HR and L&D teams, but heads of department getting an equal response there in terms of who's responsible for this. Chris, as someone who knows about education and training, what's your take on the responses for the third question?
Yeah, it's not surprising. I think every organisation is taking a slightly different approach, and we do work with organisations where it is being driven from sort of people management down. But we do get a lot of business units coming to us for whatever reason. As Ivy said, when suddenly investors start to get twitchy and it reaches the board, it might be the directors of the business contact us to deliver some internal training for them. So we deliver such a wide variety of training in this space. One of our major clients in Asia Pacific, we work with them in terms of helping them to understand internally how to communicate to clients the product range around ESG, for example. We work with a number of clients internally, making sure that their internal teams understand ESG. I'd say there's no one size fits all. It's every organization, depending on their size and location, will come to us in a slightly different way and come to the journey in a slightly different way.
Tarik, what's your take? Is this traditionally an HR, a people issue, or does the answer heads of department there, does that reflect the fact that, as you said, this is cutting through every part of the business?
I think it does need to be driven from the top down, but action needs to be taken and upskilling needs to happen. But if you think about the diversity of roles that need to be responding to the ESG challenge, then it does need really specialized and particular training for each role. And so I can understand completely why the answers have varied so much. If you're working in procurement versus if you're working in finance, the challenge of ESG is common, but how it manifests varies quite a lot. And so you can see why heads of department are really common here.
And Ivy, does this depend upon the business we're talking to? Is the right solution going to vary from organisation to organisation here?
Yes. So another one of my hats that I wear is I also do education and ESG Academy. And actually, broadly, we have an Asia Pacific Leadership Trust Institute, which ESG is a big topic. We just rolled it out. So as we're designing this, part of it is about drawing the needs from the markets, right? And Asia Pacific, interestingly, you would see all sorts of different sort of needs that comes through. And the reality is some of them comes from straight to the top, right? We are transforming. Everyone needs to know what this is, right? And the second thing is, I'm running the procurement. I need to do a smallest training, etc. So the things comes from sort of different, whether it's the learning department or the heads of department. But one thing I want to caution though, in the ESG space, there's a lot of concepts going on. But when you release the people back into their workplace, everything gets lost in translation, right? And so how do you bring that? Yes, I understand the concept to that. Yes, I can implement it. I think there's still a huge gap. So how do you marry the two? I think it's very, very important.
Now, something else that cropped up in the discussions we've had so far is people talking about an evolution away from traditional ideas of CSR through to ESG. And I get a sense that some people are very much in agreement with that. But is it fair to say within some organizations, people may not fully understand that? There may be a matter of, well, we've just swapped one acronym for another. Tarik, could you give us a bit more insight into what this change from CSR to ESG actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. I view sustainability as kind of it's providing you a license to operate. It's everything you do and how it impacts society, whether that's human beings or the planet. And what we have seen, PwC does an annual survey of CEOs, and one of the big ESG topics on the news and amongst stakeholders at the moment is climate change. But we've seen through that survey that actually it's really only about a third of CEOs are thinking about climate change as a short-term priority, because there's not yet a consideration universally amongst how CSR has transformed away from CSR to ESG, and how it is not just a small compliance and compliance issue that can be done in the corner of a business, but again, something that needs to be integrated everywhere.
Ivy, what's your view on that? Is that understanding of the evolution away from what CSR used to mean 5 years ago, 10 years ago, through to ESG, is that universally understood?
No.
Okay.
I think whether it's the CSR report, the ESG report, the sustainability report, it's all whatever you call it now. The traditional definition versus what it represents now are going towards a single direction, something that is more measurable. That is the common goal. You cannot just tell stories. So think of how we set up goals and targets and KPIs and measurables and how you track your progression. Essentially, all reports now need to have that. Here's my vision, here's my goal, and this is how I want to get there, with some qualitative, some quantitative number associated with that. I think a lot of investors or stakeholders across the stakeholder system, now they don't buy into just telling the story, right? So you can, traditional CSR, you look at the community, this is how much impact I have to the community. But they don't look at themselves, right? How am I being a responsible company? So now they're marrying all that together and becoming a more measurable system that everyone can then look at and say, okay, I see the progression. And I think that's common goal, that sort of common goal and measurable metrics is something that is sort of so forget the language. That's what I'm saying. Forget the language. Everyone is doing the same thing now.
I see. You're saying that the change isn't really a language change. It's a change in the extent to which this is enmeshed in the business, the extent to which an integral part of things, rather than this bolt-on idea that we've had previously.
That's right.
Yeah. Chris, in terms of your perspective and how the people within a business understand and expect and buy into this, CSR towards ESG, what do you think?
I'll touch on the journey of CSR to ESG, if that's okay. I think we've been searching for an all-encompassing term that unifies our view on this. As I say, when I entered financial services, people talked about ethical investing or green investing, and then it was socially responsible investing, impact investing, sustainability. How'd you go? So ESG for me now represents that umbrella term, which covers everything that's important to us as a society and important to us as professionals. How does that manifest itself from a people perspective? I think relatability is really important. I think that a lot of people they felt as though CSR was somebody else's problem. That was a C-suite problem. That's what, they take care of it, on the 42nd floor. But ESG for me is much more relatable. And I think in terms of, as you say, meshing, integrating this into our organizations and thinking, it allows us to bring people on the journey, because this is about everybody. And that's what I like about this. This is not just about a board of directors saying, oh, yeah, we've got a budget of $5 million for CSR this year. What can we do to tick that box? This is about truly transforming the way that society and businesses behave. And that to me is incredibly appealing.
And we've just got a few more minutes left with our panel here. So if you do have a question that you'd like to put to them, then now's your chance to put that in chat and we'll see what we have time for. I have another question. The people within our businesses, the people we talk to, everyone has their own particular responsibility or priorities, and say that the core measurability of my role within a business isn't ESG. It's good old-fashioned profitability or marketing or something. Something we've kind of touched on today is the idea that by pursuing a good ESG strategy, we can bring benefits through to other parts of the business. So I suppose my question is, if we're talking to other people within our business who might not necessarily have ESG at the top of their list, how can we explain to them, or how can we approach the conversation that by getting ESG right, we can bring out other benefits for the business? Tarik, should we start with you again on that one?
I'd say there's a whole load of really good research out there quantifying the benefit of ESG to some of the issues you've just brought up. So marketing, for example, we've talked about retaining and attracting talent. We know that through, again, PwC surveys, 86% of employees prefer to work for or support businesses that align with their own views on ESG issues. And so if you're speaking to a marketer, how are they getting ESG data? Are they getting timely ESG data? And are they able to communicate their own ESG data about the company to the market? Are they able to communicate it to employees and customers? Similarly, with profitability, I'm going to focus in on just climate change for a second as a big ESG issue. We've seen stats that, I think these come from the Bank of America, that if you report on emissions and you have lower than industry average emissions, you see something like a 15% increase in your valuation multiplier compared to the average company. Mm-hmm. But what we also see is that if you're not reporting your data, that's actually worse than reporting bad results, higher than average emissions data. And so I think communicating again, whether you're focused on profit, on marketing, whatever it is, ESG will affect what you're doing and will be not just a compliance issue, but again, a value creation opportunity for you.
That makes sense. The value of honesty, of transparency. Ivy, just briefly, if we can, what's your view on that conversation of how we convince people within a business that ESG benefits everything?
I think for starter, for people who isn't very attuned to ESG or what this is, look at the rating agencies, right? Pick out the AAA companies. Look at what they're doing, right? How they're creating value, and I think that's very important. What is decarbonization, whatever. Look at the things that they're doing and pick a CCC company, right? And look at what they're doing. And I think it's very straightforward conversation, right? Those are the good performers. Those are not doing so well for the reason being. And so I think that is that's why I tell people, just do a comparison. Coming from an advisor, you never trust me, right? Because you think I'm selling you something, right? And, do a bit of research yourself and see, where you should start.
Sure. Chris, quick final word from you if we can. What's your take on this idea?
Transparency is the best sunlight. It's the best disinfectant, and we're moving to an ever more transparent world. And as Ivy says, think of those companies that are doing well are going to continue to do well. These companies that have good governance, that take this seriously, they're the winners. We suspect we know who the losers might be. And those companies that invest in educating their people to understand these issues are going to be at the forefront. But I think that this is such a fascinating area and it's been such a good event. So thanks so much for hosting it.
Well, look, huge thanks to you folks. You've really helped us pull apart some of these issues to cement our understanding of it and give us some new ideas. Ivy Kuo and Tarik Moussa from PwC, thank you so much. Chris Usher from BPP, you've been brilliant, I think, in terms of helping us explore a bit more of this and recognise the direction that a lot of us we've begun our direction of travel, but a lot of us have got clearly a lot more work to do. So thank you so much.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks to Ivy and Tarik as well. And thanks to you, Clive.